All right, what's up, everybody? Quickly, going to jump on here and give you a quick live for reaction to the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade. The Eagles have traded Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and a sixth-round pick in exchange for Kenyon Green and a fifth-round pick. The picks are for next year's draft, so it will not add a fifth-rounder to this year for Philadelphia, and they lose a sixth-rounder next year. Obviously, the big thing is, why are you trading Chauncey Gardner-Johnson? It's a head-scratcher at first. I guess the first thought is, did anything that happened last week, is there any drama that's going on? Everybody wants to know, what did Chauncey Gardner-Johnson do? Who knows? I mean, this is where the guys that cover that team might uncover some information, because on the surface, you're saying Chauncey Gardner-Johnson signed a 3-year deal. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson has been on the team 2 years. They made the Super Bowl once. They won a Super Bowl. Have they already soured on him? Obviously. They just traded him. Just like all the other moves. Milton Williams, they have Maro Ajomo, a cheaper option. Josh Sweat, they have Jalix Hunt, a cheaper option. Now, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. You know, the Eagles have to be looking at money and have to be figuring out, do we have the money to sign Cam Jurgens, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalen Carter? They know they have a lot of young players that they have to free up money for, and I think this is basically the ramifications of that. Do we have somebody that can play safety? They drafted Sidney Brown in the 3rd round. I think it's time, much like all these other guys. Milton Williams was a 3rd-round pick. You have to be able to play and fill in. You can't keep paying everybody. I think the Eagles figured that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was a little bit of a luxury, and that there was a couple guys that, look, they have to say, we trust. It is one of those things. Do they trust Sidney Brown? There's Tristan McCollum back there. There's also a sneaky guy that I don't think people remembered that the Eagles signed. Lewis Cine is a guy who they was a first-round pick of the Vikings. He's a safety, played at Georgia. And I don't think people remember the Eagles even picked him up, but they did sign him, and maybe he's a guy that they feel, hey, it was a first-round pick, had some injury issues, younger guy, cheaper guy. Do they think they can plug him in? He's bounced around. He's been in Minnesota. He's been in Buffalo. But I wouldn't be shocked. He was the 32nd pick of the 2022 draft. He's played like 10 games. He had a big compound fracture. If you remember, he had a bad injury. But that was like 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years. I guess it was his rookie year. He was in the 2022 draft. So here we are now 3 years later. The Eagles had him last year as a practice squad player. Did they see enough from him to bring him in and say, hey, we want you to compete with Sidney Brown? Remember, Sidney Brown, he also had an ACL injury. That was another problem for him last year, because I've had people texting me say, you know, hey, last year when they needed a safety, they went to Tristan McCollum. I think McCollum is still the guy they look at as the 3rd guy, and that if they needed a new starting safety, that it would be Sidney Brown. So I would imagine that Sidney Brown will be the guy that gets the first crack to replace Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. As for the compensation here, okay, let's look at the compensation that Philadelphia gets. They bring in, this is interesting, because Kenyon Green was a first-round pick, high first-round pick, like the 15th pick of the draft a couple of years ago out of Texas A&M. Is this another guy that Jeff Stoutland says, hey, get me that guy, I can work with him? And I would imagine there's some connection to what's going on with Mekhi Becton. You know, we haven't heard a lot of news on Mekhi Becton, and maybe you look at Mekhi Becton and wonder if the Eagles just cannot get to terms, or the money is too big, and you decide, hey, let's bring in Kenyon Green, who, by the way, has really been a bust for the most part. There's a lot of people thought Mekhi Becton was a bust. This is a guy who's played mainly left guard, so you're going to have to change positions, probably switch him over to right guard. But again, this is where the Eagles are trusting their system and their guys. You have Jeff Stoutland, who worked with Becton last year. Now, I still think Tyler Steen is the guy that wins that job. Kenyon Green, maybe, though, pushes Steen to make sure that Steen's just not handed the job. But now the Eagles have lost Josh Sweat. They've lost Milton Williams. They've lost Isaiah Rodgers. Looks like they're going to lose Darius Slay, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And now you have to replace them. And I think all of those replacements, this is just my thoughts, I think the Eagles think all of those replacements are in-house. Josh Sweat, Jalix Hunt, Milton Williams, Moro Ojomo, Gabe Hall. Don't forget Gabe Hall's here. Thomas Booker the fourth. Now, it doesn't mean they can't draft guys in those spots and that those guys can contribute. But I think one of the problems the Eagles are looking at is they have to get cheaper. They have to get cheaper. And to get cheaper, you make a move like this. Does that mean you're better? Not necessarily right now. But they have to trust that the guys that they traded, or lost, I should say, in free agency, or now traded in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, that they have the pieces in the organization and trust their drafting that those guys can come in and do the job. I'm not saying better, but be good enough. Because I think a lot of this has to do with freeing up money, because you know you have Quinyon, you know you have Cooper, you know you have Juergens, you know you have Jalen. You got 4 really big players that you need to sign. And then I think it's a situation where the Eagles just said, look, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's making, I think he had 2 more years left on that deal. I think he got a 3-year, $30 million deal. And I definitely think that they felt they had to get cheaper at that spot. So, let's see. A couple messages. Do you think there's a way the Eagles go after Javon Holland? I think Holland signed with the Giants today. Memory serves. I think so. Right? That happened this morning. I thought he signed with the Giants. Javon Holland, I thought, signed with the Giants. Let me just look that up real quick. By the way, yes, the Giants signed him this morning, a couple hours ago. 3 years, $45 million. No, they were not signing that deal. All good. Real quick, we will be live on the radio today at 2. Don't forget, if you're watching right now, there's a lot of you watching that just streamed in here. Do me a favor, hit the retweet button, hit the like button. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, because we're going to keep doing these lives as news happens. So you'll get these live quickies about 10, 15 minutes from us here. So if more news happens, make sure you like and subscribe. When we go live on YouTube, you'll get it. When the radio show goes live at 2 o'clock, it will alert you so you can watch on your phone or your tablet or whatever you like to watch on your smart TV and all that stuff. So like, rate, review, subscribe, do all those things. And those are my quick thoughts on that. I will keep it here for a couple more minutes just to see if anything else happens. And I gave you my thoughts on that. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is out. I would think that's a sign that they like Sidney Brown. Kenyon Green, a 23-year-old who has been a bust. You obviously see a guy who has first-round talent. I think the Eagles think Jeff Stoutland works with him. I don't know that means he's going to be the starting right guard, but I think that kind of a sign that Becton's probably gone. You let Becton walk because I think I think the big picture, and I've been talking about this all week, the Eagles have all these guys they have to sign. And they see down the pipeline that they got to sign these guys. How do you do it? You got to get out ahead of it. And sometimes you have to trust yourself in your process, in your drafting. We like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but he's too expensive for us right now. We signed him to help us win a Super Bowl. We did that. So now, to try to win another Super Bowl, they got to pick out guys that they're prioritizing. And Chauncey Gardner-Johnson apparently is not one of the guys that they prioritized. There you go. As we mentioned, Sidney Brown, Tristan McCollum, Lewis Seen, I think all of those guys are going to be in play to be the new starting safety. And look, if Sidney Brown can play, he's a monster back there. I mean, he was a really interesting player as a rookie. I mean, kind of like a Tasmanian devil type of guy, just running all over. I think Sidney Brown could be a pretty dynamic safety for this team. Gives him some physicality, something that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson did not. But listen, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's a playmaker. Broke up like 12 passes, intercepts. He led the league in interceptions the first time he was in Philly. He had that year? Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the first time he was in Philly, he had 6 interceptions. Then he had 6 more last year. So his 2 stints in Philly, the guy has been so productive. 12 interceptions he has had. It's a lot. But Sidney Brown, a different type of safety. So there you go. All right, 2 o'clock today. If some more news happens, we'll be back here again. Do me a favor. If you're on Twitter watching, hit the retweet, repost, hit the like button. That really helps us out big time. It gets this show into the algorithms and allows more people to watch and be a part of it. Yes, Keenan, you are right. Slay still on the roster. A lot of reporting that he will be off the roster. Now, that doesn't mean they can't bring him back. I think it's pretty clear that they're going to let him go because of the contract situation. But Keenan, there was some reports yesterday that he's going to sign with Pittsburgh. They could have been a little premature, but I think it was more semantics that the Eagles are going to release him, and he'll probably – hey, they could bring him back. They could. But Slay being on the roster really is insignificant with the C.J. Gardner-Johnson news because Slay doesn't play safety, and I don't think he's going to play safety. I think he would come back and not replace himself, but go over there because they lost Isaiah Rodgers yesterday. They also lost Oren Burks yesterday. I thought that was an underrated loss for them. Losing Oren Burks, I think, is something that's not talked enough about because you brought back Bond, but Nakobe Dean might not be ready to start the season. And, Burks played well in the playoff run. So I guess Jeremiah Trotter Jr., they're going to look to at least step into play linebacker, start next to Zach Bond in the case that Nakobe Dean is not ready when the season starts. All right, we're going to go back and look to see if anything happens. If it does, we will be back right here at Mike Gill Show. And YouTube, The Mike Gill Show. Easy to do. All right? All right. We'll be back if something happens. If not, 2 o'clock right here on the X platform and on YouTube and on the radio, 97.3 ESPN. All right, everybody. Thanks for checking in.